Whenever I think of Edmonton, I imagine a lively city filled with history and stories. But hidden within its streets are places that carry a much darker side. Old hospitals, theaters, and houses where people once laughed and lived now stand heavy with silence. Some say they're just buildings, but if you've ever walked past them at night, you know the air feels different, colder, heavier, almost like someone is still there watching. Today, I'm taking you inside 5 of Edmonton's most haunted places, and trust me, these stories will stay with you. If you enjoy exploring haunted places with me, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next story. 1. Charles Camsell Hospital. The first time I stood in front of the Charles Camsell Hospital, the building looked more like a giant shadow than a piece of Edmonton's history. The broken windows reflected the fading evening light, and the silence around it felt heavier than the cold air on my skin. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring at it, asking myself why I even came. But something about this place had pulled me in. The same way a dark tunnel makes you want to see what's at the other end. I pushed the old gate open, and the rusty hinges screamed so loud it echoed across the empty lot. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, listening carefully, waiting for footsteps. But nothing came. Only my breathing sounded too loud in the stillness. I told myself, it's just an abandoned hospital, nothing more. But that was a lie I didn't even believe. Walking toward the main entrance, I noticed the old paint peeling off the walls, like skin falling away from something that once lived. I stepped inside, and the smell of damp air mixed with dust hit me instantly. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but instead of comfort, it made the long hallways feel endless. Every corner looked like it was waiting for me, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here. As I moved deeper, I passed by rooms that still had broken hospital beds, torn curtains, and rusted equipment. I imagined the patients who once filled these halls, their voices, their stories, their pain. That's when I heard it, the soft sound of something metal falling in the distance. My chest tightened. I stopped breathing for a moment, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound echoed through the empty building, then silence again. I whispered to myself, maybe it was just a pipe, maybe an animal. But the longer I stood still, the more I felt like someone was standing just around the corner, waiting. I forced myself to move forward. My footsteps crunched over broken glass, and every sound bounced off the empty walls, making it impossible to tell if I was alone. Then I passed by an old surgery room. For a second, I thought I saw movement inside, like a shadow slipping behind the broken cabinets. I froze again, staring into the room, waiting for my eyes to adjust. Nothing. But deep inside, my instincts screamed that I wasn't imagining it. I turned to leave, but that's when I felt it. The sudden drop in temperature, like walking into a freezer. My breath became visible, and the silence grew so loud it was almost painful. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and tried to walk faster. Behind me, I swear I heard the faint sound of footsteps following mine. The distance between each step matched my own, as if someone was perfectly copying me. My heart raced. I didn't want to turn around, but I couldn't help it. I spun around, the flashlight shaking as it lit up the hallway. Nothing was there, just empty walls. By the time I reached the exit, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely push the door open. The moment I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, and the silence didn't seem so threatening anymore. I looked back at the building, its dark windows staring at me like eyes. I knew what I had felt in there wasn't just imagination. Something still walks inside that hospital, something that doesn't want to be seen but makes sure you know you're not alone. Even now, when I think about the Charles Camsell Hospital, I don't just remember the building, I remember the fear that gripped me inside it, the kind that doesn't let you sleep easily at night. And no matter how much I try to reason it away, a part of me knows the truth. That hospital isn't empty. It never was. 2. Walterdale Theater. The first time I stepped inside the Walterdale Theater, I didn't feel like I was walking into just another building in Edmonton. The air itself carried a weight, as if every wall had been listening for over a century and was still holding on to the whispers. I had heard stories about this place, about a man who died here during the theater's early days, but until you stand inside those dim hallways, stories don't mean much. The floorboards creaked under my shoes as I moved closer to the stage. It wasn't the sound of old wood that unsettled me. It was how each creak seemed to answer my steps, almost like someone else was walking just a second behind me. I tried to brush it off. It's a theater, after all, the old kind, built with heavy beams and dust that never quite leaves. But when I reached the front row and looked up at the empty stage, the silence was so sharp, I felt my chest tighten. I climbed up onto the stage. The spotlight wasn't on, but I could still imagine how many actors had stood here before me. I took a deep breath, and for a moment, it felt like I wasn't alone. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement in the wings, a shadow darting across where no one should have been. I froze. My flashlight shook slightly as I tried to steady my hand, sweeping it across the curtains. Nothing. Just the heavy fabric swaying a little, even though the air was still. That's when I heard it. A cough. Soft, human, but distant, like someone clearing their throat politely. My stomach dropped. The theater was empty. I knew it. I had checked every door, every seat, but that sound, it wasn't imagination. It came from right there, behind the curtain. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but my legs carried me forward anyway, step by step. I pulled the curtain aside with one quick motion, my light cutting through the darkness. The space behind it was empty, completely empty. Yet the smell of old cigarette smoke lingered, sharp and out of place, as if someone had just been standing there minutes ago. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it all, but then came the final spike. As I turned back toward the stage, I caught sight of a figure standing in the balcony, tall, still, watching. My throat tightened, and I couldn't even call out. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, lifted the flashlight, but the balcony was empty again. The seats were untouched, dust lying thick over every row. By the time I left, I felt as though I'd been followed out the door. I couldn't shake the thought that whoever lingers in that theater doesn't want to be forgotten. Even outside, with the city lights flickering around me, I kept glancing over my shoulder. And to this day, when I think about Walterdale Theater, I don't remember the stage or the seats. I remember those eyes in the balcony, silent, steady, and watching. 3. Fairmont Hotel, McDonald. The night I checked into the Fairmont Hotel McDonald, I told myself the stories were just old tales passed down through the years. It was a luxury hotel, elegant and grand, not the kind of place you expect to feel afraid. But as soon as I walked into the lobby, I couldn't shake the sense that there was something heavier than the chandeliers hanging in that space, like the air itself was carrying memories no one could see. I was given a room on one of the higher floors. The hallways were long, quiet, and strangely colder than the lobby below. Every step I took echoed back to me, and with each echo, it felt like someone else's steps were following. I tried to laugh at myself, brushing it off as the old architecture, but deep down. Later that night, I left my room to walk the corridors. The hotel was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. As I turned a corner, I suddenly heard it, the sharp clatter of hooves on the marble floor. At first, I thought it had to be my imagination. Who would believe the sound of a horse in the middle of a hotel? But the sound grew louder, echoing down the hallway like it was charging straight toward me. I froze. My pulse pounded in my ears as the sound thundered closer. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the sound itself, like the walls were holding their breath. I looked down the hallway. Nothing. No movement. No horse. Just an empty stretch of polished floor. I tried to steady myself, but the spikes kept coming. As I reached the staircase, I felt a sudden rush of cold air, so cold that I could see my breath. I grabbed the railing, my hand trembling, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure tall, thin, standing just beyond the light. My heart sank into my stomach. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there. I blinked, and in that split second, it was gone. By the time I made it back to my room, Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to leave. But when I closed the door behind me, I heard it again. Soft hoofbeats in the hallway. Slow this time, as if pacing just outside my room. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath. The sound lingered for a moment, then faded into silence once more. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every whisper of the wind outside kept me on edge. And even now, when I think of the Fairmont Hotel McDonald, I don't remember the luxury or the beauty of the place. I remember those hoofbeats. Loud, impossible, and terrifying, echoing through a hotel that should never have been able to hold them. 4. Mount Pleasant Cemetery. I still remember the first night I walked through Mount Pleasant Cemetery. The city lights were far away, and the quietness there didn't feel peaceful. It felt watchful. The iron gate was cold under my hand as I pushed it open, and the hinges let out a groan that seemed too loud for the silence around me. For a second, I thought about turning back, but curiosity pulled me forward. The air inside the cemetery felt different, heavier. The rows of gravestones stretched in every direction, their shapes barely visible under the dim light of my flashlight. Each step crunched on the gravel path, and every crunch made me more aware that I was completely alone. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I walked past a cluster of old gravestones, some cracked and leaning to the side. The names were faded, almost erased by time. As I bent down to read one, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned, and that's when I saw it, a faint glow hovering near another grave a few rows away. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from the streetlight, but there was no streetlight anywhere near that part of the cemetery. The glow pulsed, faint but steady, like it was breathing. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. My mouth went dry, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on that light. Just as suddenly as it appeared, it faded out, leaving nothing but darkness. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew I had seen something real. I forced myself to keep walking, telling myself I'd just do one loop and leave. As I moved deeper, the silence grew thicker. Then I heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel path behind me. Slow, steady, matching my own pace. I spun around, my flashlight shaking as I aimed it down the path. No one was there. The gravel was undisturbed. My skin crawled as the footsteps stopped with me, like whoever was following had frozen too. I turned back quickly and walked faster, my breath short and sharp. My footsteps echoed louder, but then I realized something terrifying: they weren't echoing. I could hear another set, just slightly out of sync with mine, like someone was deliberately walking a step behind. I broke into a half run, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. When I finally reached the gate, I didn't look back. I pushed it open and stumbled into the street, the noise of distant traffic hitting me like a wave of relief. I stood there, catching my breath, staring back into the cemetery. It was silent again, still and calm, as if nothing had happened. But even now, whenever I think about Mount Pleasant Cemetery, I don't picture the gravestones or the trees. I remember the glow, faint but alive, and the footsteps that followed me until the very end. And a part of me knows if I had stayed just a little longer, I wouldn't have left alone. 5 Firkins House, Fort Edmonton Park. When I first walked into Fort Edmonton Park, I never expected one particular house to pull me in the way it did. The Firkins house looked ordinary from the outside, just a small wooden home tucked among the historic buildings. But the moment I stepped closer, something about it felt different, almost like the air was heavier around it. I remember pausing at the doorway, my hand on the handle, and for a second, I questioned if I should even go inside. The silence was so strong that even the sound of my own breathing felt out of place. When I finally opened the door, a strange chill moved straight through me. Even though it wasn't a cold day at all, the inside of the house was simple. Wooden floors, old furniture, a fireplace that hadn't been used in years. But what made it unsettling was the feeling that someone was standing right behind me the entire time. Every creak of the floor made me stop in my tracks. At one point, I thought I heard faint footsteps upstairs, but I knew I was completely alone. As I moved from room to room, I noticed how each space seemed colder than the last. My camera battery, which was full before I entered, suddenly drained halfway in just a few minutes. That's when my heart started racing. People often talk about energy draining in haunted places, but it's one thing to hear about it, and another to actually watch your camera die in front of your eyes. The moment that shook me the most came when I stood near the back window. For a split second, I saw a figure of a woman reflected in the glass standing behind me. She was dressed in old-style clothing, nothing modern, and her expression was completely blank. I spun around instantly, but there was no one there. I wanted to leave right then, but something in me made me stay a little longer, almost like the house wanted me to. The strange part is, I can't remember walking out. I just remember being outside again, my chest tight, and realizing how much time had passed. It felt like I had been in there for 10 minutes, but when I checked my phone, more than an hour had gone by. Even now, whenever I think about the Firkins house, I get a knot in my stomach. It doesn't matter how many people say it's just another historic home. The truth is, once you step inside, you'll know exactly why so many believe it's haunted. And I can say this with certainty, I've never felt anything like it in my life.